Hi everyone, this is CS50 Mario problem. So in this problem, from problem set 1, we are supposed to print out a Super Mario pyramid. More accurately, we are supposed to print out two Super Mario pyramids. Now in this problem, we are supposed to get comfortable with creating functions, getting the input from the user, and also creating loops. It's pretty simple, but if you're just beginning, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So it is very useful to think about this, to think about problems you're solving from the highest order first. So before you actually write down anything in programming language in C, it is useful to get a clear picture of what you're trying to accomplish here. So right off the bat, we know that we have to create a function which will force the user to input integers no less than 1 and no more than 8, because that's basically what the problem says here. Okay, but besides this, in the main function we are supposed to print a pyramid. But what is the Super Mario pyramid? Well, we can represent it by hashes, which will represent bricks, and dots, which will represent basically void, the blank spaces. So if we represent the pyramid bricks using hashes, if we just print out hashes, we will get an inverted pyramid, which is good for the start, but actually we want to, create the pyramid that basically they created here. So we will have to also print out dots. If we think about this problem as a computer would, basically doing one operation at a time. What is our first task or first operation? Well, we are supposed to print out these dots. The second operation will be to print out one hash, and then we are supposed to create a new line, create a new line and then print out these dots and these hashes. But how are we going to represent these dots and hashes? Well, we will represent them mathematically. Let's say that the input from the user is 8, which is illegal in this task. 8 is less than 9. Okay. So if the user inputs 8, what is our first task? Well, our first task is going to be print out 7 dots and then 1 hash. Then in the second row we will print out 6 dots and 2 hashes. Then 5 dots and 3 hashes, and so on. Well, basically dots will decrease by 1 after each loop, after each iteration, and hashes will increment, hashes will increase by 1 after each iteration. So in order to represent this mathematically, we will basically represent dots mathematically as being equal to height minus 1, which will be in the first iteration it will be equal to 7. In the second iteration will be equal to 6, then 5, and until there are no dots at all. What about hashes? Well, hashes will be basically 1, no matter no matter the number of the height of the pyramid. It will always be 1 in the beginning. 1 plus 1 after each iteration we will increment it by 1, all the way until reach the height of the pyramid. Okay, but before we get to the main part, I would like to create a function which will allow the user, or more accurately, to force the user to input an integer that which is no less than 1 and no more than 8. So we will call this function get positive integer. So if you're just getting started with programming or CS50 or C, you might find this a little bit confusing and ask yourself, what does this int in the beginning and this void in the end represent? Well, basically they represent this int in the before the name of the function represents the output, and this void represents the input of this function. So what is the output of the function get positive int? Well, obviously it is going to be an integer. So we typed in int. And what is the input of this function? Well, in this function we do not have any input. We will basically hardcode this variable, which will be height, so we do not need any input. So here I am declaring a function, a variable inside of this function, which is called height, and this variable is an integer. And my next step is to create a do while loop. If you do not understand what a do while loop actually does, it is okay, because I will basically explain it right now. A do while loop is like any other loop, like do or for loop, but do while loop is probably the simplest one, and it gives us one free pass through the loop itself before asking us a question. And this question will be, is this equal to this, or is this less than this? So what do we want to do in this loop? Well, in this loop we want to keep asking the user for the input, and this input will be an integer which will represent the height of the pyramid. So height will be equal to get int. Okay. So our input that the user will type in will be height of the pyramid. Get int is a function inside of the CS50 library, which makes this task a little bit easier. So when do we want to keep asking the user for the input? Well, we want to keep asking the user for the input for as long as the input is not what we want him to input. And more specifically, we want to keep asking for as long as the height is less than 1, or for as long as the height is more than 8. So remember, the height cannot be less than 1 and it cannot be more than 8. Pretty simple, and this function is completed. But before we can actually go to the main function, we need to type in the prototype before the main function. The prototype will basically be copying this function's name and putting a semicolon. Now we can go to the main function. So again, before going to the meat of this function, we need to create a couple of variables, but I will go step by step so you can understand what is going on a bit better. In the beginning, you should just create a variable which will represent the height of the pyramid. Okay, so we need to I made a typo. Okay, so we need to ask the user for the input for the height, and the way we will do this is basically by calling this getPositiveInteger function, and this is done. Now we can go to the actual creation of the pyramid. So, like I said, first step will be printing out these dots. So we need to create a for loop. So I purposely left out this part here so I can describe what is going on. So in this function we are creating a variable which will be an integer named dot, and this dot will increment after every iteration by an order of 1, so by 1. How many dots do we want to print out in the first row of the pyramid? Well, we want to print out a 7 dots in the first row, as I said. More specifically, mathematically, we want to print out height minus 1. So how will we achieve this? Well, we will achieve this by creating another variable which we will call counter, and this counter will be equal to pyramid minus 1. So the number of dots cannot be more than the counter variable which we just created. So what do we want to achieve from this loop itself? Well, very simply, we just want to print out dots. After we are done with this loop, we want to increment the counter, that is, take out one number from the counter. So decrease it by 1, which means after each iteration, the next iteration will be, if we start out with 7, which is height minus 1 or pyramid minus 1, in the second iteration of the loop it will be 7 minus 1, which is 6, then 6 minus 1, which is 5, and that's basically how we create this descending order of dots. So after creating dots, we need to print out hashes. So yeah, int hash is equal to 1. Yeah, and I made a mistake here. That must be equal to 0. Okay, so hash cannot be more than this. I'll leave this for later, and hash will increment by 1 after each iteration. Okay, so how many hashes do we want to print in the first row? Well, we want to print 1 hash, but in the second row we want to print 2 hashes, then 3, then 4, then 5. So we need to create a second counter, which we will call simply counter 2, and this counter will be equal to what it has to be equal to in order to print out only 1 hash in the first row. Well, it has to be equal to 1. So hash cannot be more than counter 2, and counter 2 is 1. This might be a little confusing, but hash starts with 0. So how many numbers is there between 0 and 1? Well, it's only 1, basically. So what do we want to print out now? If we look at this pyramid, there are blank spaces between 2 pyramids, but those blank spaces never change. There are always 2 blank spaces or 2 dots. So we do not need a for loop to represent these dots. we can just simply say printf and put 2 dots, and that's it. So, but now we need to represent the second pyramid, and we will achieve this by printing out a for loop. Int hash2 hash2 is less than counter 2, because we still need to print out only one hash. We are still on the first row of the pyramid. And hash2 will also increment by 1, and we will print f hash. Now after we printed out this hash, we need to print out a new row. But before going to the new row, we need to increase the counter 2 by 1, because in the second iteration of the for loop, we want to print out 2 hashes, not 1 hash anymore. So counter 2 is equal to counter 2 plus 1, and then we can print out new row. And that's supposed to be it. Okay, let's see if this works. We've made some mistakes. Okay, make Mario. Okay, support make Mario, and I made a mistake. Oh yeah, the mistake is on the line 22. So hash will be equal to 0. Yeah, I made a little mistake, and it's supposed to be working now. Line 36. So this is pretty common when you don't test out the code many times. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. In this get positive int function, I didn't return anything, so there is no way for this function, when I call it, to basically get the value of height. So what do we need to do here? Well, we need to basically return height. Okay, now it's working. Let's try putting the height as a -1. So it looks like this get positive int function is working so far. Let's try 9. It's asking me again for the input, which means this function get positive int is working. Now let's try the main function itself. So it's typing 8, for instance. So before we can actually print out this pyramid, we need to set how many times do we want to iterate, basically how many rows we want to create. And like I said, if the input is 8, we want to create 8 rows. So we need to loop over all of these functions, over all of these loops, a set number of times, and this number of times is equal to if the input to basically to the input. So we need to create a loop for int I is equal to 0, and I cannot be more than pyramid I plus plus, and we will just put this inside. Okay. And there it is. Now it's working, but as we've seen in the program, we are not supposed to print out dots. We are supposed to print out blank spaces. Dots were there just to have a better visualization of what we are trying to achieve, but they are not necessary. We can just leave out blank spaces. And this is basically it. We'll try it once again with a height of 4. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. Yeah. So this is Mario from CS50, and yeah, it's pretty simple. Try it out. You will make some mistakes. It's fine. You just need to get used with creating functions and looping over. So yeah, I wish you luck, and I hope this helped a little bit.